The Mafia expected bullets that night, not a 7-year-old girl holding a crumpled $10 bill. "Will you make my stepfather disappear?" The question hit the air like a gunshot. Every man on that sidewalk froze. Viktor's hand hovered over his holster. 2 soldiers near the restaurant door stopped breathing. A 7-year-old girl had just asked a Mafia boss to kill someone. And she wasn't crying, she wasn't begging, she was negotiating. Before we continue, comment below where you're watching from. These stories always hit differently depending on your part of the world. The sidewalk outside Ricardo's was sacred ground. No cops walked it. No rivals dared breathe on it. Joe Ricardo had built an empire from this corner of Manhattan. Everyone knew, you don't approach uninvited. But this girl? She walked straight up to the most dangerous man in the city like she had an appointment. Joe set down his stack of bills, turned slowly. His tattooed hands that had ended men, went still. The girl was tiny, faded pink shirt, jeans too big for her, a fresh wound on her cheek that made Viktor's jaw clench. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Joe's voice came out softer than anyone expected. "Carmen. Carmen Vega." "Where are your parents, Carmen?" "My mom's in the hospital. She won't wake up." Joe's eyes narrowed. "And your father?" "He's not my father." Carmen's voice turned cold. Colder than any 7-year-old's voice should ever be. "He's the reason she won't wake up." Across the street, a black sedan rolled past slowly. Tinted windows, no plates. Viktor clocked it immediately, his hand tightening. Joe noticed too, but his eyes stayed locked on the girl. "This man," Joe said carefully. "The one you want to disappear. What did he do?" Carmen touched her cheek. The wound was fresh, still red. "He said if I told anyone, something bad would happen to Marco." "Who's Marco?" "My little brother. He's 3. The temperature on that sidewalk dropped 10 degrees. Joe crouched down. His scarred face, a souvenir from a war he never discussed, was now inches from hers. Most grown men couldn't hold his gaze for 3 seconds. Carmen didn't blink. "I saved this for a whole year." She pushed the $10 toward him. "Birthday money, please, mister. I heard you make problems go away. The police won't help. My teacher didn't help. Nobody helps. If this moment hit you, tap the like button so YouTube pushes this story to more people who love emotional storytelling like this." Joe looked at that crumpled bill. $10. He'd ordered hits for less. He'd buried men for nothing. But this? A child offering her birthday money to save her baby brother from a monster the system refused to touch? This was different. "Keep your money, Carmen." Her face crumpled. "Please, I don't have more, but I can—" "I said keep it." Joe's voice was firm, but not harsh. "We're going to help you." Carmen's eyes went wide. "Really? Even though it's only $10? Joe took the bill from her trembling hand, slipped it into his jacket pocket. "This," he said quietly, "is the most important contract I've ever signed." Viktor was already on the phone. 2 soldiers moved toward the black SUV down the block. The machinery of the organization, the same machinery that had toppled rivals and corrupted officials, began turning toward a new target. Behind them, the black sedan circled back, watching. Joe didn't care. He had a new mission now. What Joe Ricardo did next would rewrite every rule the Mafia had ever lived by. Carmen didn't just hire a monster. She awakened one. Joe led Carmen to a table in the corner. Away from the street. Away from watching eyes. Viktor stood guard. The other soldiers formed a loose perimeter, their faces unreadable but their fists clenched. "Tell me everything," Joe said. And Carmen did. Her voice was steady. Too steady for a child her age. Like she'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in front of a bathroom mirror, preparing for the one person who might actually listen. His name is Ray. Ray Durning. He married my mom 2 years ago. And before that? Before that, we were happy. Carmen explained how it started small, a slap here, a shove there, always followed by apologies and flowers and promises that it would never happen again. But it always happened again. 3 weeks ago, my mom tried to leave. She packed a bag for me and Marco in the middle of the night. Carmen paused. Her small hands gripped the edge of the table. Ray found out. Joe didn't move. What happened? He pushed her down the stairs, told the hospital she fell. They believed him. Her voice cracked for the first time. She hasn't woken up since. Viktor turned away. Even he couldn't watch this. And now? Joe asked quietly. Where do you and Marco stay? With Ray. He has custody because my mom can't. She trailed off. The social workers came once. Ray made the house look nice, made us say everything was fine. They left and never came back. And nobody else helped? Teachers? Neighbors? Mrs. Gutierrez next door tried. She called the police twice. But Ray knows people, important people. The police always believe him. Joe leaned back. His jaw tightened. He'd spent 15 years building an empire on fear. He'd bribed cops, judges, politicians. He knew exactly how men like Ray Durning operated, because he'd enabled men like Ray Durning. This wasn't just a rescue mission. This was a reckoning. Why me? Joe asked. Why come to a man like me? Carmen looked at him with eyes far older than 7 years. Because the good people already said no. The teachers, the police, the social workers, they all said no. She paused. Mrs. Gutierrez told me you're a bad man. She said you make people disappear. She said you're dangerous. And that didn't scare you? No. Carmen shook her head slowly. Because Ray is dangerous too, and nobody stops him. Maybe it takes a monster to stop a monster. The words hung in the air. Joe reached into his pocket, pulled out the crumpled $10 bill. He smoothed it flat on the table between them. This is now a contract, Carmen. You understand? She nodded. Then we have a deal. Joe's voice dropped to something low and final. Ray Durning is my problem now. Behind him, Viktor was already dialing. The hunt had begun. Viktor took 2 men. Santino, who could hack into any database with a laptop and an energy drink, and Mikhail, an ex-FSB operative who knew how to extract information from people who didn't want to talk. Their orders were simple. Find everything. Within 6 hours, they found far more than they expected. Ray Durning's house sat in a quiet, suburban neighborhood. White picket fence, manicured lawn, an American flag hanging by the front door. From the outside, it looked like the American dream. Viktor knew better. He'd seen enough monsters to recognize their hiding spots. Neighbors first, he told Mikhail. Knock on doors, be polite, let them talk. They talked. Mrs. Gutierrez, the woman who had told Carmen about Joe, was the first to open up. Her hands shook as she spoke. I called the police twice. Twice. I heard that little girl screaming through the walls. You know what the cops said? They said Ray is a respected contractor. Said I was probably hearing the television. She wiped her eyes. I heard a child scream for help. That wasn't a television. Santino worked from a parked van 2 blocks away. Hospital records, school attendance files, CPS case numbers. Everything left a digital trail if you knew where to look. What he found made his stomach turn. Carmen had visited the emergency room 4 times in 18 months. Broken wrist, bruised ribs, a fall down the stairs. Each time, Ray had been present. Each time, the explanation was accepted without question. Marco, 3 years old, had been brought in twice. Once for burns on his hand, once for a fractured arm. Burns on a toddler. Santino had done dark work for the organization. He'd seen violence most people couldn't imagine. But this? Hurting children? He sent the files to Viktor with a single message. This guy needs to disappear. The CPS records were harder to access, buried deep, flagged as resolved. But Santino found them. 3 separate complaints had been filed against Ray Durning in the past year. 3. Each one had been investigated, then quietly closed. No follow-up. No removal of the children. Nothing. The caseworker's name appeared on all 3 dismissals. Santino ran the name, cross-referenced it with Ray's financial records. There it was. A deposit of $5,000 into the caseworker's account 2 days after the first complaint was closed. Ray hadn't just beaten the system, he'd bought it. Viktor called Joe at midnight. "Boss, it's worse than we thought." "How much worse?" "Hospital records show repeated injuries on both kids. CPS had 3 complaints, all buried. The caseworker took bribes, and Ray's got connections to a city councilman and at least 1 police captain." Silence on the other end. Then Joe's voice, cold as January steel. "Bring me everything. Names, dates, account numbers, all of it. And Ray, don't touch him yet." Joe paused. "When we take him down, I want it to be permanent." Joe arrived at St. Mary's Hospital alone. No soldiers, no backup. Just a man in a dark coat carrying a bouquet of flowers he'd bought from a bodega on the corner. He signed in at the front desk as Michael Torres, family friend. The receptionist didn't look twice. Room 304 was at the end of a quiet hallway, the kind of hallway where hope went to die. Elena Vega looked nothing like her daughter. Where Carmen was fierce and unbroken, Elena was hollow, thin, fragile. Her face was swollen on one side, bruises fading from purple to yellow. Tubes ran from her arms to machines that beeped in a slow, steady rhythm. She was breathing, but she wasn't there. Joe stood at the foot of her bed for a long moment. He'd seen death before. He'd caused it. But there was something different about this. Something that made his chest tight in a way he didn't recognize. This woman had tried to protect her children, and the world had punished her for it. "Are you family?" Joe turned. A nurse stood in the doorway, mid-40s, tired eyes, the kind of tired that came from seeing too much and being able to do too little. "Friend of the family," Joe said. "I just heard what happened." The nurse stepped inside, closed the door behind her. "You're not a friend of Ray's, are you?" Joe met her eyes. "No, I'm not." Something in the nurse's posture shifted. Relief. Or maybe desperation. "Good." She moved to check Elena's IV, her voice dropping low. "Because that man is a monster, and nobody in this hospital will say it out loud." "Tell me," Joe said. The nurse hesitated. Then the dam broke. She tried to leave him 3 times. 3. The first time he found her at her sister's house and dragged her back by her hair. The second time she made it to a shelter. He tracked her down within 48 hours. The third time... She gestured toward Elena's motionless body. The third time, he made sure she couldn't run again. Joe's jaw tightened. "And the police? Ray's got friends. Powerful ones. Every report gets buried. Every complaint disappears." The nurse's voice cracked. "I've seen women like Elena before. I know how this ends. Either she wakes up and he finishes the job, or she doesn't wake up at all." She turned to Joe. Her eyes were wet. "I don't know who you are. I don't want to know. But those kids, Carmen and Marco, they're still in that house with him, and nobody is coming to save them." She grabbed Joe's arm. "Please, if you can do anything, anything at all. Those children don't have anyone else." Joe looked at Elena, at the machines keeping her alive, at the bruises that told a story no one wanted to hear. "She has someone now," he said quietly. "They all do." He left the flowers on her bedside table and walked out with murder in his eyes. Santino spread the documents across Joe's desk like a surgeon laying out instruments before an operation. Bank statements, property records, phone logs, campaign donation receipts. It's worse than we thought, boss. Joe leaned forward. Show me. The first name was Captain Bernard Hayes. 22 years on the force. Decorated officer, respected leader, and completely owned by Ray Durning. Durning's construction company has paid Hayes $15,000 over the past 3 years, Santino explained, always in small amounts, always routed through a fake consulting firm. In return, Hayes personally closed 2 domestic violence complaints against Ray, made the paperwork vanish. Joe studied the bank records. Who else? Councilman Peter Braddock. He fast-tracked building permits for 3 of Ray's developments. Got $40,000 in campaign donations. All legal on paper, all dirty underneath. And the third? Santino hesitated. This one was bigger. Judge Margaret Chen. Family court. She handled Elena's custody petition last year. Joe's eyes narrowed. Elena tried to get custody? Tried and failed. Judge Chen ruled in Ray's favor despite documented injuries on both kids. 2 months later, her husband's failing restaurant received a $50,000 investment from an anonymous LLC. Santino pulled up the paperwork. The LLC traces back to Ray's business partner. Joe stood, walked to the window, stared out at the city lights below. He'd spent 15 years building an empire by understanding one simple truth. Everyone has a price. Cops, politicians, judges. The whole system ran on favors and fear. He'd exploited that system countless times. Now he was seeing it from the other side. A mother beaten into a coma, 2 children trapped with their abuser, and an entire network of powerful people paid to look the other way. This wasn't just one bad man. This was a fortress. Boss, Viktor's voice came from the doorway. What's the play? Joe didn't turn around. If we take Ray down, what happens? Santino answered. Hayes buries it. Braddock applies pressure. Chen throws out any case that reaches her courtroom. Ray walks. Maybe he even gets the kids back. And if we expose the whole web? Silence. Viktor spoke carefully. Then we're not just taking down an abuser. We're taking down a police captain, a councilman, and a judge. That's war, Joe. The kind that brings heat on all of us. Joe turned. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with something none of his men had seen before. A 7-year-old girl walked up to me with $10 and asked me to save her life. She did that because every single person who was supposed to protect her, teachers, cops, social workers, judges, failed. They didn't just fail. They were paid to fail. He looked at the documents spread across his desk. Ray Durning isn't the disease. He's a symptom, and I'm done treating symptoms. Viktor straightened. So we go to war? Joe picked up Captain Hayes' file. We burn it all down. The call came at 2 a.m. Santino's voice was tight, controlled, but Joe could hear the rage underneath. Marco's in the ER St. Mary's. Ray told them he fell off the bed. Joe's grip on the phone tightened. How bad? Fractured collarbone, bruising on his back consistent with... Santino stopped, took a breath. He's 3 years old, boss. 3. Joe was already reaching for his coat. Wake Viktor. Wake everyone. Tonight we move. The plan had been to build the case slowly, gather evidence, expose the corruption web, take Ray down legally so he'd rot in prison for years. But that plan assumed the children had time. Marco didn't have time. Joe made the call every leader dreads, the one where careful strategy gets thrown out the window because a child's life hangs in the balance. We extract them tonight, both of them. No delays. Viktor didn't argue. Where do we take them? Elena has a mother, lives in Pennsylvania, 3 hours away, clean record, No connection to Ray. And when Ray reports them missing, Joe's jaw tightened. Let him. The extraction was surgical. Viktor and Mikhail moved through Ray's neighborhood at 3 a.m. No headlights, no engine noise, just shadows sliding between houses. Carmen was awake, waiting by her window like she'd known they were coming. Is it time? She whispered. Viktor nodded. Get your brother. Quietly. Don't pack anything. She didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions. She simply lifted Marco from his crib, careful of his fractured collarbone, and carried him to the window. 3 years old. Bandaged. Whimpering in his sleep. Mikhail had seen war zones. He'd seen torture chambers. But watching that little girl carry her broken brother through a window to escape their own home, that broke something inside him. By 4 a.m., the children were in a black SUV heading south on I-95. By 7 a.m., they were in the arms of their grandmother, a woman named Rosa, who collapsed into tears the moment she saw them. I tried, Rosa kept saying. I tried to get custody. The judge said no. They said Ray was a fit parent. Viktor handed her an envelope. Cash. Enough to disappear for a while. New phones are inside. Don't contact anyone from your old life. We'll be in touch. Rosa clutched Carmen tight. Who are you people? Viktor paused at the door. Friends. Ray Durning woke at 8 a.m. to an empty house. By 9 a.m., he was screaming at a 911 dispatcher about kidnapped children. By noon, Captain Hayes had issued an Amber Alert. Councilman Braddock was making calls. Judge Chen was standing by to issue emergency orders. The entire corrupt machinery roared to life. But the children were ghosts now. No trail, no records, no witnesses. Joe watched the news coverage from his office. Ray Durning, tearful and frantic, begging for his children's safe return. Joe smiled. Enjoy the spotlight, Ray. It's about to get much brighter. Joe's men wanted blood. Viktor had a plan. Clean. Quiet. Ray Durning would simply vanish one night and never be found. But Joe said no. Death is too easy, too quick. He stared at the wall of evidence Santino had assembled. I want him to watch everything he built collapse around him. I want him to suffer slowly, and I want everyone who protected him to feel the flames. Viktor frowned. So, what's the play? Joe smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. We don't kill him. We destroy him. The first package arrived at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division on a Monday morning. No return address, no fingerprints, just a thick envelope containing 3 years of Ray Durning's real financial records. Hidden income, fraudulent deductions, shell companies used to launder money from inflated construction contracts, tax evasion totaling $2.3 million. By Tuesday, an investigation was opened. By Wednesday, Ray's accountant was subpoenaed. The second package went to FBI Special Agent Diana Reyes. She had a reputation. Incorruptible. Relentless. The kind of agent who'd turned down bribes and buried her own career prospects because she refused to play politics. The perfect weapon. Inside her package, hospital records for Carmen and Marco, photos of their injuries, the buried CPS reports, bank statements showing payments to the caseworker who'd closed each complaint, and a handwritten note. The children are safe. Make sure they stay that way. Agent Reyes started making calls within an hour. The third package went to the New York Times. A journalist named Sarah Chen, no relation to the corrupt judge, received an anonymous email with attachments. Campaign finance violations, exposed connections between Ray Durning, Captain Hayes, Councilman Braddock, and Judge Margaret Chen. A web of corruption laid bare. She published the story 3 days later. The rats began abandoning ship. Captain Hayes suddenly announced his early retirement, citing health reasons. He refused all media interviews. Councilman Braddock issued a statement claiming he barely knew Ray Durning and that any donations were handled by staff without his knowledge. Judge Chen recused herself from all pending family court cases and hired a criminal defense attorney. The system that had protected Ray Durning for years. It evaporated overnight. Ray watched it all unfold from his empty house. His phone rang constantly. Lawyers, reporters, federal agents requesting voluntary interviews. His friends stopped returning calls. His business partners filed paperwork to dissolve their partnerships. His bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. He was still a free man. But the walls were closing in. And somewhere out there, his children were beyond his reach. No amount of money or connections could find them. It was like they'd never existed. Ray Durning had spent years believing he was untouchable. Now he couldn't touch anything. Joe received updates every evening, watched the coverage, read the headlines. He didn't smile, didn't celebrate. Not yet. The destruction had only begun. The FBI came for Ray Durning on a Thursday morning. 6 a.m., 3 black SUVs, 12 agents in tactical gear. They didn't knock. They used a battering ram. Ray was still in his bathrobe when they dragged him onto his front lawn. Neighbors gathered on porches, phones out, recording everything. The man who had terrorized his family for years was now face down on wet grass, hands cuffed behind his back, screaming about lawyers and lawsuits and knowing important people. Nobody came to help him. The charges were read in federal court that afternoon. Tax evasion, wire fraud, money laundering, falsifying business records, and then the ones that mattered most. 2 counts of child endangerment and 1 count of aggravated assault causing serious bodily harm. Elena, Carmen, Marco. Finally, their suffering had names in a courtroom. The evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors presented hospital records spanning 18 months, photos of injuries, testimony from nurses, neighbors, and the caseworker who'd accepted bribes, now cooperating in exchange for a reduced sentence. Ray's attorney requested bail. The judge, a new one, not Margaret Chen, laughed out loud. Mr. Durning poses a clear flight risk and an ongoing danger to the community. Bail denied. Ray was led away in shackles. He looked smaller somehow. Deflated. The arrogance that had made him untouchable was gone. In its place was the face of a man who finally understood that money couldn't save him. Not this time. The news coverage was relentless. Every channel ran the footage. Ray's perp walk, the charges, the corruption scandal that had engulfed a police captain, a councilman, and a judge. Captain Hayes was arrested 2 days later. Councilman Braddock resigned and fled to Florida. Judge Chen surrendered to authorities and was released on bond, her career finished. The web Joe had promised to burn? It was ashes now. 300 miles away, Carmen sat on her grandmother's couch. Marco was asleep in the next room. Rosa was making dinner in the kitchen. The television played softly in the corner. Carmen watched the footage of Ray being led into the courthouse. She didn't speak, didn't move. And then for the first time in months, she started to cry. Rosa rushed in. "Carmen? Mija, what's wrong?" But Carmen was smiling through her tears. "Nothing's wrong, Abuela." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "He can't hurt us anymore. It's over." Rosa held her tight. Let her cry. Let months of fear and pain and silence pour out onto her shoulder. Carmen had carried her brother through windows, had walked into a monster's den with $10 and a desperate prayer. And somehow, impossibly, it had worked. She was safe. Marco was safe. And the man who had haunted her nightmares was finally in a cage. For the first time in 2 years, Carmen slept without fear. Elena opened her eyes on a Tuesday afternoon. The first thing she saw was light, soft, golden, filtering through hospital blinds she didn't recognize. The second thing she saw was her daughter's face. "Mama?" Carmen's voice cracked. She'd been sitting in that chair for 3 hours, waiting, hoping, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. And now her mother was looking at her. Actually looking at her. "Carmen," Elena's voice was a whisper, rough from weeks of silence. Where am I?" "You're safe, Mama. We're all safe." The doctors called it a miracle. 6 weeks in a coma, traumatic brain injury, internal bleeding. They'd prepared Rosa for the worst. But Elena fought. Somewhere in the darkness, she'd clawed her way back. For her children. Rosa explained everything slowly, carefully. Ray was gone, arrested, federal custody. He would spend the next 15 to 20 years in prison, if he survived that long. Men who hurt children didn't do well behind bars. The house was gone too, seized by the government as part of the fraud case. But none of that mattered. What mattered was this. Carmen and Marco were alive, unharmed, living with Rosa in Pennsylvania. And Elena's medical bills, over $200,000, had been paid in full. "By who?" Elena asked, her brow furrowed. Rosa shook her head. "We don't know. Anonymous donation. The hospital said a wire transfer came through 3 weeks ago. No name, no return address, nothing." Elena looked at Carmen. "Do you know who helped us?" Carmen was quiet for a long moment. She thought about Joe Ricardo, his tattooed hands, his scarred face, the way he'd crouched down to meet her eyes and taken her $10 like it was worth $1 million. She thought about Viktor, who'd carried Marco so gently through the window. About Mikhail, who'd looked away so she wouldn't see him cry. About the black SUV that had delivered them to safety while the world slept. She thought about monsters, real ones and imagined ones, and she realized something she'd carry for the rest of her life. Sometimes the people the world calls dangerous are the only ones willing to help. "Carmen?" Elena reached for her daughter's hand. "Who saved us?" Carmen squeezed back. "A bad man," she said softly. "Who was actually good." Elena didn't understand. Maybe she never would. But she saw something in her daughter's eyes, a peace that hadn't been there before. A weight lifted. A nightmare ended. She decided not to ask again. Some angels didn't want to be named. That night, Carmen climbed into the hospital bed beside her mother. Elena held her close, smelled her hair, felt her heartbeat. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." Carmen shook her head. "You tried, Mama, you always tried." She closed her eyes. "And now someone else finished the job." Outside, the sun set over Pennsylvania. Inside, a family began to heal. 6 months later, Carmen returned to Manhattan. She walked the same sidewalk she'd walked that night, past the same cafe tables, toward the same corner where her life had changed forever. But everything felt different now. She was taller, healthier. The bruises were gone. The fear was gone. And this time, she wasn't alone. Elena walked beside her, holding Marco's hand. Rosa followed close behind. A family. Whole again. Viktor spotted them first. He didn't reach for his weapon this time. Instead, he smiled, something his men had never seen him do, and opened the restaurant door. "He's been expecting you." Joe Ricardo sat at his usual table in the back. He looked the same. Dark suit, tattooed hands, eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. But when Carmen approached, something softened in his face. "You've grown," he said. Carmen nodded. She was holding something behind her back. "I made this for you." She handed him a piece of folded construction paper. "It's a thank you card. I know it's not much, but..." Joe opened it slowly. Inside, in crayon and glitter, Carmen had drawn a picture. A tall man in black, a little girl in pink, and between them, a $10 bill with a heart around it. The words read, "Thank you for being the monster I needed." Joe stared at it for a long moment. His jaw tightened. His eyes glistened with something he'd never admit to. "Come with me," he said quietly. "There's something I want to show you." He led her to his office, a room few people ever entered. On the wall, behind his desk, hung a single frame. Inside it was a crumpled $10 bill. Carmen's $10 bill. "This," Joe said, "is the most valuable contract I ever signed." Carmen looked at it. Then at him. "Why did you help me? You didn't have to." Joe was quiet for a moment. "Because you reminded me of something I forgot a long time ago." He crouched down to her level, just like he had that first night. "That power means nothing if you don't use it to protect the people who can't protect themselves." Carmen smiled. A real smile. The kind she'd almost forgotten how to make. She left with her family that afternoon. Back to Pennsylvania. Back to the quiet life they were slowly rebuilding. Joe watched them go from the restaurant window. Viktor appeared beside him. "You going soft on me, boss?" Joe didn't answer. He just stared at the empty sidewalk where a 7-year-old girl had once changed everything. The Mafia didn't become heroes that year. They still ran their empire, still operated in shadows, still did things that would never see the light of day. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Because now they knew what they were capable of, when it mattered. And on Joe Ricardo's wall, a $10 bill hung in a frame. A reminder, a promise, a contract fulfilled.